Chapter 13. The Carbonari. In this sect, the whole of the hitherto recognized principles of organized atheism were perfected and intensified. In it, from the commencement, a cunning hypocrisy was the means most used as the best calculated to lead away a people Catholic to the very core. The first of the Carbonari that we have any distinct notice of appeared at a season when atheism, directed by Weishaupt, was busy in forming everywhere secret associations for apparently no purpose other than political amelioration. He determined to try upon the peasantry of Italy the same arts which the French had intended for the Catholic peasantry of Ireland. The United Irishmen were banded together to demand, amongst other things, Catholic emancipation. Never had a people greater reason to rise against oppression than the Catholics of Ireland of that period. They were urged on to do so, however, by leaders who, in many instances, were not Catholic and who had no political grievance, and whose aim was the formation in Ireland of an independent republic, ruled, of course, by themselves, on the model of the one which was established then in France. That seemed to the Catholic the only way to get out of the heretical domination which had, for such a lengthened period, oppressed his country. Now the Carbonari of Italy were at first formed for a purpose identical with that of the United Irishmen. They conspired to bring back their national independence ruined by the French, the freedom of their religion, and their rightful Bourbon sovereign. With them, it was made an indispensable obligation that each member should be not only a Catholic, but a Catholic going regularly to the sacraments. They took for their Grand Master Jesus Christ our Lord. But, as I have said before, it is impossible for a secret society, having a death penalty for breach of secret, having ascending degrees, and bound to blind obedience to hidden masters, to remain any appreciable length of time without falling under the dominion of the supreme directory of organized atheism. It was so with Carbonarism, which, having started on the purest Catholic and loyal lines, soon ended in being the very worst kind of secret society which infidelity had then formed on the lines of Masonry. Very soon, Italian adepts in Black Masonry invaded its ranks, the loudest in the protestation of religion and loyalty. Equally soon, these skilled, experienced, and unscrupulous veterans in dark intrigue obtained the mastery in its supreme direction, won over proselytes from fit conspirators, and had the whole association in their power. It was then easy to find abundant pretexts to excite the passions of the rank and file, to kindle hopes from revolution, to create political dissatisfaction, and to make the whole body of the sect what it has actually become. Italian genius soon outstripped the Germans in astuteness, and as soon, perhaps sooner than Weishaupt passed away, the supreme government of all the secret societies of the world was exercised by the Alta Vendita, or highest lodge of the Italian Carbonari. The Alta Vendita ruled the blackest Freemasonry of France, Germany, and England, and until Mazzini wrenched the scepter of the Dark Empire from that body, it continued with consummate ability to direct the revolutions of Europe. It considered, with that wisdom peculiar to the children of darkness, that the conspiracy against the Holy See was the conspiracy in permanence. It employed its principal intrigues against the state, the surroundings, and the very person of the pontiff. It had hopes, by its manipulations, to gain eventually even the Pope himself, to betray the Christian cause, and then it well knew the universe would be placed at its feet. It left unmeasured freedom to the lodges of Masonry to carry on those revolutions of a political kind, which worked out the problems of the sect upon France, Spain, Italy, and other countries. It kept still greater movements to itself. The permanent instruction of this body to its adepts will give you an idea of its power, its policy, and its principles. It says as follows.
Chapter 14. Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita. Ever since we have established ourselves as a body of action, and that order has commenced to reign in the bosom of the most distant lodge, as in that one nearest to the centre of action, there is one thought which has profoundly occupied the men who aspire to universal regeneration. That is the thought of the enfranchisement of Italy, from which must one day come the enfranchisement of the whole world, the fraternal republic, and the harmony of humanity. That thought has not yet been seized upon by our brethren beyond the Alps. They believe that revolutionary Italy can only conspire in the shade, deal some strokes of the poniard to sbirri and traitors, and tranquilly undergo the yoke of events which take place beyond the Alps for Italy, but without Italy. This error has been fatal to us on many occasions. It is not necessary to combat it with phrases which would be only to propagate it. It is necessary to kill it by facts. Thus, amidst the cares which have the privilege of agitating the minds of the most vigorous of our lodges, there is one which we ought never to forget. The papacy has at all times exercised a decisive action upon the affairs of Italy. By the hands, by the voices, by the pens, by the hearts of its innumerable bishops, priests, monks, nuns, and people in all latitudes, the papacy finds devotedness without end ready for martyrdom, and that to enthusiasm. Everywhere, whenever it pleases to call upon them, it has friends ready to die or lose all for its cause. This is an immense leverage which the popes alone have been able to appreciate to its full power, and as yet they have used it only to a certain extent. Today, there is no question of reconstituting for ourselves that power, the prestige of which is for the moment weakened. Our final end is that of Voltaire and of the French Revolution, the destruction forever of Catholicism, and even of the Christian idea which, if left standing on the ruins of Rome, would be the resuscitation of Christianity later on. But to attain more certainly that result, and not prepare ourselves with gaiety of heart for reverses which adjourn indefinitely, or compromise for ages the success of a good cause, we must not pay attention to those braggarts of Frenchmen, those cloudy Germans, those melancholy Englishmen, all of whom imagine they can kill Catholicism, now with an impure song, then with an illogical deduction, at another time with a sarcasm smuggled in like the cottons of Great Britain. Catholicism has a life much more tenacious than that. It has seen the most implacable, the most terrible adversaries, and it has often had the malignant pleasure of throwing holy war on the tombs of the most enraged. Let us permit, then, our brethren of these countries to give themselves up to the sterile intemperance of their anti-Catholic zeal. Let them even mock at our Madonnas and our apparent devotion. With this passport, we can conspire at our ease, and arrive little by little at the end we have in view. Now the papacy has been for 17 centuries inherent to the history of Italy. Italy cannot breathe or move without the permission of the supreme pastor. With him she has the 100 arms of Briareus. Without him she is condemned to a pitiable impotence. She has nothing but divisions to foment, hatreds to break out, and hostilities to manifest themselves from the highest chain of the Alps to the lowest of the Apennines. We cannot desire such a state of things. It is necessary, then, to seek a remedy for the situation. The remedy is found. The Pope, whoever he may be, will never come to the secret societies. It is for the secret societies to come first to the Church, in the resolve to conquer the two. The work which we have undertaken is not the work of a day, nor of a month, nor of a year. It may last many years, a century perhaps, but in our ranks the soldier dies and the fight continues. We do not mean to win the popes to our cause, to make them neophytes of our principles and propagators of our ideas. That would be a ridiculous dream, no matter in what manner events may turn. Should cardinals or prelates, for example, enter willingly or by surprise in some manner into a part of our secrets, it would be no means a motive to desire their elevation to the see of Peter. That elevation would destroy us. Ambition alone would bring them to apostasy from us. The needs of power would force them to immolate us. That which we ought to demand, that which we should seek and expect, as the Jews expected the Messiah, is a pope according to our wants. Alexander VI, with all his private crimes, would not suit us, for he never erred in religious matters. Clement XIV, on the contrary, would suit us from head to foot. Borgia was a libertine, a true sensualist of the 18th century, strayed into the 15th. He has been anathematized, notwithstanding his vices, by all the voices of philosophy and incredulity, and he owes that anathema to the vigor with which he defended the Church. Ganganelli gave himself over, bound hand and foot, to the ministers of the Bourbons, who made him afraid, and to the incredulous who celebrated his tolerance, and Ganganelli is become a very great pope. He is almost in the same condition that it is necessary for us to find another, if that be yet possible. With that we should march more surely to our attack upon the Church than with the pamphlets of our brethren in France, or even with the gold of England. Do you wish to know the reason? It is because by that we should have no more need of the vinegar of Hannibal, no more need of the powder of cannon, no more need even of our arms. We have the little finger of the successor of St. Peter engaged in the plot, and that little finger is of more value for our crusade than all the Innocents, the Urbans, and the St. Bernards of Christianity. We do not doubt that we shall arrive at that supreme term of all our efforts, but when? But how? The unknown does not yet manifest itself. Nevertheless, as nothing should separate us from the plan traced out, as on the contrary all things should tend to it, as if success were to crown the work scarcely sketched out tomorrow, we wish in this instruction, which must rest a secret for the simple initiated, to give to those of the Supreme Lodge counsels with which they should enlighten the universality of the brethren, under the form of an instruction or memorandum. It is of special importance, and because of a discretion, the motives of which are transparent, never to permit it to be felt that these counsels are orders emanating from the Alta Vendita. The clergy is put too much in peril by it, that one can at the present hour permit oneself to play with it, as with one of these small affairs, or of these little princes, upon which one need but blow to cause them to disappear. Little can be done with those old cardinals, or with those prelates, whose character is very decided. It is necessary to leave them as we find them, incorrigible, in the school of consalvi, and draw from our magazines of popularity or unpopularity the arms which will render useful or ridiculous the power in their hands. A word which one can ably invent, and which one has the art to spread amongst certain honourable chosen families, by whose means it descends into the cafes and from the cafes into the streets, a word can sometimes kill a man. If a prelate comes to Rome to exercise some public function from the depths of the provinces, know presently his character, his antecedents, his qualities, his defects above all things. If he is in advance, a declared enemy, an Albani, a Polota, a Bernetti, a Delia Genga, a Rivarola, envelop him with all the snares which you can place beneath his feet. Create for him one of whose reputations which will frighten little children and old women. Paint him cruel and sanguinary, recount regarding him some traits of cruelty which can be easily engraved in the minds of the people. When foreign journals shall gather for us these recitals, which they will embellish in their turn, inevitably because of their respect for truth, show, or rather cause to be shown, by some respectable fool, those papers where these names and the excesses of the personages implicated are related. As France and England, so Italy will never be wanting in facile pens, which know how to employ themselves in these lies so useful to the good cause. With a newspaper, the language of which they do not understand, but in which they will see the name of their delegate or judge, the people have no need of other proofs. They are in the infancy of liberalism. They believe in liberals, as later on they will believe in us, not knowing very well why. Crush the enemy, whoever he may be. Crush the powerful by means of lies and calumnies, but especially crush him in the egg. It is to the youth we must go. It is that which we must seduce. It is that which we must bring under the banner of the secret societies, in order to advance by steps, calculated but sure. In that perilous way, two things are of the first necessity. You ought to have the air of being simple as doves, but you must be prudent as the serpent. Your fathers, your children, your wives themselves ought always to be ignorant of the secret which you carry in your bosoms. If it pleases you, in order the better to deceive the inquisitorial eye, to go often to confession, you are as by right authorized to preserve the most absolute silence regarding these things. You know that the least revelation, that the least indication escaped from you in the tribunal of penance, or elsewhere, can bring on great calamities, and that the sentence of death is already pronounced upon the revealer, whether voluntary or involuntary. Now then, in order to secure to us a pope in the manner required, it is necessary to fashion for that pope a generation worthy of the reign of which we dream. Leave on one side old age and middle life. Go to the youth, and, if possible, even to infancy. Never speak in their presence a word of impiety or impurity. Maxima debetur puero reverentia. Never forget these words of the poet, for they will preserve you from licenses which it is absolutely essential to guard against for the good of the cause. In order to give yourself the right of asylum at the domestic hearth, you ought to present yourselves with all the appearance of a man grave and moral. Once your reputation is established in the colleges, in the gymnasiums, in the universities, and in the seminaries, once that you shall have captivated the confidence of professors and students, so act that those who are principally engaged in the ecclesiastical state should love to seek your conversation. Nourish their souls with the splendors of ancient papal Rome. There is always at the bottom of the Italian heart a regret for republican Rome. Excite and kindle those natures so full of warmth and of patriotic fire. Offer them at first, but always in secret, inoffensive books, poetry resplendent with national emphasis. Then, little by little, you will bring your disciples to the degree of cooking desired. When upon all the points of the ecclesiastical state at once, this daily work shall have spread our ideas as the light, then you will be able to appreciate the wisdom of the counsel in which we take the initiative. Events, which in our opinion precipitate themselves too rapidly, go necessarily in a few months' time to bring on an intervention of Austria. There are fools who in the lightness of their hearts please themselves in casting others into the midst of perils, and meanwhile there are fools who at a given hour drag on even wise men. The revolution which they meditate in Italy will only end in misfortunes and persecutions. Nothing is ripe, neither the men nor the things, and nothing shall be for a long time yet. But from these evils you can easily draw one new cord, and cause it to vibrate in the hearts of the young clergy. That is the hatred of the stranger. Cause the German to become ridiculous and odious even before his foreseen entry. With the idea of the pontifical supremacy mix always the old memories of the wars of the priesthood and the empire. Awaken the smoldering passions of the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. Thus you will obtain for yourselves the reputation of good Catholics and pure patriots. That reputation will open the way for our doctrines to pass to the bosoms of the young clergy, and go even to the depths of convents. In a few years the young clergy will have, by the force of events, invaded all the functions. They will govern, administer, and judge. They will form the council of the sovereign. They will be called upon to choose the pontiff who will reign. And that pontiff, like the greater part of his contemporaries, will be necessarily imbued with the Italian and humanitarian principles which we are about to put in circulation. It is a little grain of mustard which we place in the earth, but the Sun of Justice will develop it even to a great power, and you will see one day what a rich harvest that little seed will produce. In the way which we trace our brethren, there are found great obstacles to conquer, difficulties of more than one kind to surmount. They will be overcome by experience and by perspicacity. But the end is beautiful. What does it matter to put all the sails to the wind in order to attain it? You wish to revolutionize Italy? Seek out the Pope, of whom we give the portrait. You wish to establish the reign of the elect upon the throne of the prostitute of Babylon? Let the clergy march under your banner, in the belief, always, that they march under the banner of the apostolic keys. You wish to cause the vast vestige of tyranny and of oppression to disappear? Lay your nets like Simon Bar-Jonah. Lay them in the depths of sacristies, seminaries, and convents, rather than in the depths of the sea, and if you will precipitate nothing, you will give yourselves a draught of fishes more miraculous than his. The fisher of fishes will become a fisher of men. You will bring yourselves as friends around the apostolic chair. You will have fished up a revolution in tiara and cope, marching with the cross and banner, a revolution which needs only to be spurred on a little to put the 4 quarters of the world on fire. Let each act of your life tend then to discover the philosopher's stone. The alchemists of the Middle Ages lost their time and the gold of their dupes in the quest of this dream. That of the secret societies will be accomplished for the most simple of reasons, because it is based on the passions of man. Let us not be discouraged, then, by a check, a reverse, or a defeat. Let us prepare our arms in the silence of the lodges, dress our batteries, flatter all passions the most evil and the most generous, and all lead us to think that our plans will succeed one day above even our most improbable calculations. This document reveals the whole line of action followed since by the Italian revolutionists. It gives also a fair insight into tactics with which other European countries have been made familiar by Freemasonry generally. But we are in possession of what appears, to me, a still more striking document, written for the benefit of the Piedmontese lodges of the Carbonari, by one of the Alta Vendita, whose pseudonym was Piccolo Tigre, Little Tiger. I may here mention that the custom of taking these fanciful appellations has been common to the secret societies from the very beginning. Arouet became Voltaire, the notorious Baron Niguet was called Philo, Baron Dittfort was called Minos, a custom adopted by the principal chiefs of the dark atheistic conspiracy then and since. The first leader or grand chief of the Alta Vendita was a corrupt Italian nobleman who took the name of Nubius. From such documents as he, before his death, managed, in revenge for being sacrificed by the party of Mazzini, as we shall see, to have communicated to the authorities of Rome, or which were found by the vigilance of the Roman detective police, we find that his funds, and the funds for carrying on the deep and dark conspiracy in which he and his confederates were engaged, came chiefly from rich German Jews. Jews, in fact, from the commencement, played always a prominent part in the conspiracies of atheism. They do so still. Piccolo Tigre, who seems to have been the most active agent of Nubius, was a Jew. He travelled under the appearance of an itinerant banker and jeweler. This character of moneylender or usurer disarmed suspicion regarding himself and as such of his confederates as he had occasion to call upon in his peregrinations. Of course, he had the protection of the Masonic body everywhere. The most desperate revolutionists were generally the most desperate scoundrels otherwise. They were gamblers, spendthrifts, and the very class with which the usurious Jew would be expected to have money dealings. Piccolo Tigre thus travelled safely, and brought safely to the superior lodges of the Carbonari such instructions as the Alta Vendita thought proper to give. In the document referred to, which I shall now read for you, it will be seen how anxious the secret directory were to make use of the common form of Masonry, notwithstanding the contempt they had for the bons vivants who only learned from the craft how to become drunkards and liberals. Beyond the Masons, and unknown to them, though formed generally from them, lay the deadly secret conclave which, nevertheless, used and directed them for the ruin of the world and of their own selves. The next chapter contains a translation of the document, or instructions, as it was called, addressed by Piccolo Tigre to the Piedmontese lodges of the Carbonari. Chapter 15. Letter of Piccolo Tigre. In the impossibility in which our brothers and friends find themselves, to say as yet their last word, it has been judged good and useful to propagate the light everywhere, and to set in motion all that which aspires to move. For this reason, we do not cease to recommend to you, to affiliate persons of every class, to every manner of association, no matter what kind, only provided that mystery and secrecy should be the dominant characteristics. All Italy is covered with religious confraternities, and with penitents of diverse colors. Do not fear to slip in some of your people into the very midst of these flocks, led as they are by a stupid devotion. Let our agents study with care the personnel of these confraternity men, and they will see that little by little they will not be wanting in a harvest. Under a pretext, the most futile, but never political or religious, create by yourselves, or better yet, cause to be created by others, associations having commerce, industry, music, the fine arts, etc. for object. Footnote 1. Mazzini, after exhorting his followers to attract as many of the higher classes as possible to the secret plotting, which has resulted in unified Italy, and is meant to result in Republican Italy as a prelude to Republican Europe, says, associate, associate. All is contained in that word. The secret societies can give an irresistible force to the party who are able to invoke them. Do not fear to see them divided. The more they are divided, the better it will be. All of them advance to the same end by different paths. The secret will be unveiled. So much the better. The secret is necessary to give security to members, but a certain transparency is necessary to strike fear into those wishing to remain stationary. When a great number of associates who receive the word of command to scatter an idea abroad and make it public opinion can concert even for a moment, they will find the old edifice pierced in all its parts and falling, as if by a miracle, to the least breath of progress. They will themselves be astonished to see kings, lords, men of capital, priests, and all those who form the carcass of the old social edifice fly before the sole power of public opinion. Courage, then, and perseverance. End of footnote 1. Reunite in one place or another, in the sacristies or chapels even. These tribes of yours, as yet ignorant, put them under the pastoral staff of some virtuous priest, well known, but credulous and easy to be deceived. Then infiltrate the poison into those certain hearts. Infiltrate it in little doses, and, as if by chance. Afterwards, upon reflection, you will yourselves be astonished at your success. The essential thing is to isolate a man from his family, to cause him to lose his morals. He is sufficiently disposed by the bent of his character to flee from household cares, and to run after easy pleasures and forbidden joys. He loves the long conversations of the cafe and the idleness of shows. Lead him along, sustain him, give him an importance of some kind or other. Discreetly teach him to grow weary of his daily labors, and by this management, after having separated him from his wife and from his children, and after having shown him how painful are all his duties, you will then excite in him the desire of another existence. Man is a born rebel. Stir up the desire of rebellion until it becomes a conflagration, but in such a manner that the conflagration may not break out. This is a preparation for the grand work that you should commence. When you shall have insinuated into a few souls disgust for family and for religion, the one nearly always follows in the wake of the other, let fall some words which will provoke the desire of being affiliated to the nearest lodge. That vanity of citizen or the burgess to belong to freemasonry is something so common and so universal that it always makes me wonder at human stupidity. I began to be astonished at not seeing the entire world knock at the gates of the venerables, and demand from these gentlemen the honor to be one of the workmen chosen for the reconstruction of the Temple of Solomon. The prestige of the unknown exercise upon men a certain kind of power, that they prepare themselves with trembling for the phantasmagoric trials of initiation and of the fraternal banquet. To find oneself a member of the lodge, to feel oneself called upon to guard from wife and children a secret which is never confided to you, is for certain natures a pleasure and an ambition. The lodges today can well create gourmands, they can never bring forth citizens. There is too much dining amongst right worshipful and right reverend brethren of all the ancients, but they form a place of depot, a kind of stud, breeding ground, a centre through which it is necessary to pass before coming to us. The lodges form but a relative evil, an evil tempered by a false philanthropy, and by songs, yet more false, as in France. All that is too pastoral and too gastronomic. But it is an object which is necessary to encourage without ceasing. In teaching a man to raise his glass to his lips, you become possessed of his intelligence and of his liberty. You dispose of him, turn him round about, and study him. You divine his inclinations, his affections, and his tendencies. Then, when he is ripe for us, we direct him to the secret society of which Freemasonry can be no more than the antechamber. The Alta Vendita desires that under one pretense or another, as many princes and wealthy persons as possible should be introduced into the Masonic lodges, princes of a sovereign house, and those who have not the legitimate hope of being kings by the grace of God, all wish to be kings by the grace of a revolution. The Duke of Orleans is a Freemason. The Prince of Carignan was one also. There are not wanting in Italy and elsewhere those amongst them who aspire to the modest enough honours of the symbolic apron and trowel. Others of them are disinherited and proscribed. Flatter all of their number who are ambitious of popularity, monopolize them for Freemasonry. The Alta Vendita will afterwards see what it can do to utilize them in the cause of progress. A prince who has not a kingdom to expect is a good fortune for us. There are many of them in that plight. Make Freemasons of them. The lodge will conduct them to Carbonarism. A day will come, perhaps, when the Alta Vendita will deign to affiliate them. While awaiting, they will serve as bird-lime for the imbeciles, the intriguing, and the bourgeoisie, and the needy. These poor princes will serve our ends, while thinking to labor only for their own. They form a magnificent sign-board. They are always fools enough to be found who are ready to compromise themselves in the service of a conspiracy, of which some prince or other seems to be the ringleader. Once that a man, that a prince especially, shall have commenced to grow corrupt, be persuaded that he will hardly rest upon the declivity. There is a little morality even amongst the most moral of the world, and one goes fast in the way of that progress. Do not then be dismayed to see the lodges flourish, while Carbonarism recruits itself with difficulty. It is upon the lodges that we count to double our ranks. They form, without knowing it, our preparatory novitiate. They discourse without end upon the dangers of fanaticism, upon the happiness of social equality, and upon the grand principles of religious liberty. They launch amidst their feelings thundering anathemas against intolerance and persecution. This is positively more than we require to make adepts. A man imbued with these fine things is not very far from us. There is nothing more required than to enlist him. The law of social progress is there, and all there. You need not take the trouble to seek it elsewhere. In the present circumstances, never lift the mask. Content yourselves to prowl about the Catholic sheepfold, but as good wolves, cease in the passage the first lamb who offers himself in the desired conditions. The burgess has much of that which is good for us, the prince still more. For all that, these lambs must not be permitted to turn themselves into foxes like the infamous Carignan. The betrayal of the oath is a sentence of death, and all those princes, whether they are weak or cowardly, ambitious or repentant, betray us or denounce us. As good fortune would have it, they know little, in fact not anything, and they cannot come upon the trace of our true mysteries. Upon the occasion of my last journey to France, I saw with profound satisfaction that our young initiated exhibited an extreme ardor for the diffusion of Carbonarism. But I also found that they rather precipitated the movement a little. As I think, they converted their religious hatred too much into a political hatred. The conspiracy against the Roman See should not confound itself with other projects. We are exposed to see germinate in the bosom of secret societies ardent ambitions, and the ambitious, once masters of power, may abandon us. The route which we follow is not as yet sufficiently well traced so as to deliver us up to intriguers and tribunes. It is of absolute necessity to decatholicize the world, and an ambitious man, having arrived at this end, will guard himself well from seconding us. The revolution in the Church is the revolution en permanence. It is the necessary overthrowing of thrones and dynasties. Now, an ambitious man cannot really wish these things. We see higher and farther. Endeavor, therefore, to act for us, and to strengthen us. Let us not conspire except against Rome. For that, let us serve ourselves with all kinds of incidents. Let us put to profit every kind of eventuality. Let us be principally on our guard against the exaggerations of zeal. A good hatred, thoroughly cold, thoroughly calculated, thoroughly profound, is of more worth than all these artificial fires and all these declamations of the platform. At Paris they cannot comprehend this, but in London I have seen men who seized better upon our plan, and who associated themselves to us with more fruit. Considerable offers have been made to me. Presently we shall have a printing establishment at Malta placed at our disposal. We shall then be able with impunity, with a sure stroke, and under the British flag, to scatter from one end of Italy to the other, books, pamphlets, etc., which the Alta Vendita shall judge proper to put in circulation. This document was issued in 1822. Since then, the instructions it gives have been constantly acted upon in the lodges of Carbonarism, and not only in Italy, but everywhere else. Prowl about the Catholic sheepfold and seize the first lamb that presents himself in the required conditions. This, and the order to get into Catholic confraternities, were as well executed by the infamous Cari under the influence of No. 1 as they were by any Italian conspirator and assassin under the personal inspiration of Piccolo Tigre. Cari, the loud-spoken Catholic, the Catholic who had Freemason or Orange friends able to assist him in the truly Masonic way of getting members to the craft as town councillors or aldermen or members of Parliament, was, we now know, a true secret society hypocrite of the genuine Italian type. He prowled with effect round the Catholic sheepfold. He joined with fruit the confraternities of the Church. Another curious instruction given by the Alta Vendita to the Carbonari of the lower lodges is the way to catch a priest and to make the good simple man unconsciously aid the designs of the revolutionary sectaries. In the permanent instruction of the Alta Vendita, given to all the lodges, you will recollect the passage I read for you relative to the giving of bad names to faithful prelates, who may be too knowing or too good to do the work of the Carbonari against conscience, God, and the souls of men. Ably find out the words and the ways to make them unpopular, is the sum of that advice. Has it not been attempted amongst ourselves? But the main advice of the permanent instruction is to seduce the clergy. The ecclesiastic to be deceived is to be led on by patriotic ardor. He is to be blinded by a constant, though of course false and fatal popularity. He is to be made believe that his course, so pleasant to flesh and blood, is not only the most patriotic, but the best for religion. A free church in a free state was the cry with which the sectaries pulled down the altars, banished the religious, seized upon church property, robbed the Pope, and despoiled the propaganda. There were ecclesiastics so far deceived, at one time, as to be led away by these cries in Italy, and ecclesiastics have been deceived, if not by these, at least by cries as false and fatal elsewhere to our knowledge. The seduction of foremost ecclesiastics, prelates, and bishops was the general policy of the sect at all times, and it remains so everywhere to this day. The rank and file of the Carbonari had to do with local priests and local men of influence. These were, if possible, to be corrupted, unnerved, and seduced. Each Carbonaro was ordered to try and corrupt a fellow Christian, a man of family, by means that the devil himself incarnate could not devise better for the purpose. At the end of his letter, Piccolo Tigre glances at means of corruption which he hoped then, and his hopes were soon realized to the full, to have in operation for the scattering of Masonic light throughout Italy. We have another document which will enable us to judge of the nature of this light. It is contained in the letter from Vindex to Dubius, and was meant to cause the ideas of the Alta Vendita to pass through the lodges. It is found in that convenient form of questioning which the Sultan propounds to the Sheikh ul-Islam when he wants to make war. He puts his reasons in a set of questions, and the Sheikh replies in as many answers. Then the war is right in the sight of Allah, and so all Islam go to fight in a war so sanctified. The new Islam does the same. A skillfully devised set of questions are posed for the consideration of one member of the Alta Vendita by another, and the answer, which has been well concocted in secret conclave, is of course either given or implied to be given by the nature of the case. The horrible quality of the diabolical measures proposed by Vindex to Nubius in this form for the desired destruction of the Church cannot be surpassed. If he discountenances assassination, it is not from fear or loathing of that frightful crime, but simply because it is not the best policy. He certainly did not fall in upon the only blow that could, if that were possible, which, thank God, it is not, destroy the Church, and place, as he well says, Catholicism in the tomb. This is a translation of the document. Castellamare, 9th August 1838. The murders of which our people render themselves culpable now in France, now in Switzerland, and always in Italy, are for us a shame and a remorse. It is a cradle of the world, illustrated by the epilogue of Cain and Abel, and we are too far in progress to content ourselves with such means. To what purpose does it serve to kill a man? to strike fear into the timid and to keep audacious hearts far from us? Our predecessors in Carbonarism did not understand their power. It is not in the blood of an isolated man or even of a traitor that it is necessary to exercise it. It is upon the masses. Let us not individualize crime. In order to grow great, even to the proportions of patriotism and of hatred for the Church, it is necessary to generalize it. A stroke of danger signifies nothing, produces nothing. What does the world care for a few unknown corpses cast upon the highway by vengeance of secret societies? What matters it to the world if the blood of a workman or an artist, of a gentleman or even of a prince, has flown in virtue of a sentence of Mazzini, or certain of his cutthroats playing seriously at the Holy Verme? The world has not time to lend an ear to the last cries of the victim. It passes on and forgets. It is we, my Nubius, we alone, that can suspend its march. Catholicism has no more fear of a well-sharpened stiletto than monarchies have. But these two bases of social order can fall by corruption. Let us then never cease to corrupt. Tertullian was right in saying that the blood of martyrs was the seed of Christians. Let us then not make martyrs, but let us popularize vice amongst the multitudes. Let us cause them to draw it in by their five senses, to drink it in, to be saturated with it, and that land which Arentinus has sown is always disposed to receive lewd teachings. Make vicious hearts, and you will have no more Catholics. Keep the priest away from labor, from the altar, from virtue. Seek adroitly to otherwise occupy his thoughts and his hours. Make him lazy, a gourmand, and a patriot. He will become ambitious, intriguing, and perverse. You will thus have 1,000 times better accomplished your task than if you had blunted the point of your stiletto upon the bones of some poor wretches. Do not wish, nor do you any more, my friend Nubius, to devote my life to conspiracies, in order to be dragged along in the old ruts. It is corruption en masse that we have undertaken, the corruption of the people by the clergy, and the corruption of the clergy by ourselves, the corruption which ought, one day, to enable us to put the Church in her tomb. I have recently heard one of our friends, laughing in a philosophic manner at our projects, say to us, in order to destroy Catholicism, it is necessary to commence by suppressing woman. The words are true in a sense, but since we cannot suppress woman, let us corrupt her with the Church, corruptio optime pessima. The object we have in view is sufficiently good to tempt men such as we are. Let us not separate ourselves from it for some miserable personal satisfaction of vengeance. The best poniard with which to strike the Church is corruption. To work, then, even to the very end. The horrible program of impurity here proposed was at once adopted. It was, after all, but an attempt more determined than ever to spread the immorality of which Voltaire and his school were the apostles. At the time the Alta Vendita propounded this infernal plan, they were resisting an inroad upon the authority on the part of Joseph Mazzini, just then coming into notoriety, who, however, overcame them. Mazzini developed and taught, in his grandiloquent style, as well as practiced the doctrine of assassination. Footnote 1. The following extracts from the rules of the Carbonari of Italy. Young Italy will give an idea of the spirit and intent of the order as improved by the warlike and organizing genius of Mazzini. Article 1. The society is formed for the indispensable destruction of all the governments of the peninsula and to form of Italy one sole state under a republican government. Article 2. Having experienced the horrible evils of absolute power, and those yet greater of constitutional monarchies, we ought to work to found a republic one and indivisible. Article 30. Those who do not obey the orders of the secret society, or who shall reveal its mysteries, shall be poniarded without remission. The same chastisement for traitors. Article 31. The secret tribunal shall pronounce the sentence and shall deign 1 or 2 affiliated members for its immediate execution. Article 32. Whoever shall refuse to execute the sentence shall be considered a perjurer, and as such shall be killed on the spot. Article 33. If the culpable individual escape, he shall be pursued without intermission in every place, and he shall be struck by an invisible hand, even should he take refuge in the bosom of his mother or in the tabernacles of Christ. Article 34. Every secret tribunal shall be competent not only to judge the culpable adepts, but also to cause to be put to death every person whom it shall have stricken with anathema. Article 34. The officer shall carry a dagger of antique form, the sub-officers and soldiers shall have guns and bayonets, together with a poniard a foot long, attached to their cincture, and upon which they will take oath, etc. A large number of inspectors of police, generals, and statesmen were assassinated by order of these tribunals. The lodges assisted in that work. Eckhart says, La Franc-Maçonnerie, Tome 2, page 218 and 219, Mazzini was the head of that young empire and the warlike power of Freemasonry, and we find in the Latomia that the minister of Notre-Robe had retired from it, said to Monsieur Webergem, even in the National Palace, in the presence of 6 deputies, that Freemasonry at the present time in Belgium had become a powerful and dangerous arm in the hands of certain men, that the Swiss insurrection had its resting place in the machinations of the Belgian lodges, and that Brother de Fac, Grand Master of these lodges, had undertaken in 1844 a voyage to Switzerland only in order to prepare that agitation. End of footnote 1. Which formed, we know, a part of the system of all secret societies, and which the Alta Vendita deprecated because they feared that it was about to be employed, just then, against the members of their own body. Mazzini speaks of having arisen from his bed one morning fully satisfied as to the lawfulness of removing whomsoever he might be pleased to consider an enemy by the dagger, and fully determined to put that horrible principle into execution. He cherished it as the simplest means given to an oppressed people to free themselves from tyrants. But however much he labored to make his terrible creed plausible, as it being only permissible against tyrants and traitors, it was readily foreseen how easily it could be extended until it became a capital danger for the sectaries themselves. Human nature could never become so base and so blinded as not to revolt against a principle so pernicious. It may last for a season amidst the most pioneers of the Alta Vendita, amongst the Black Hand in Spain, amongst the Nihilists in Russia, amongst the Invincibles in Ireland, amongst the trade unionists of the Braglois swamp in England, or amongst the communists in Paris. It may serve as a means to hold in terror the unfortunate prince or leader who may be seduced in youth or manhood to join secret societies from motives of ambition, and when that ambition was gratified, might refuse to go the lengths for socialism which the Alta Vendita required. But otherwise assassination did not by experience prove such a sovereign power in the hands of the Carbonari as Mazzini expected. His more astute associates soon found out this, and not only any qualms of conscience, but from a strong sense of its inexpediency for their ends, they determined to reject it. They found out a more effective, though a far more infamous, way for attaining the dark mastery of the world. It was by the assassination not of bodies, but of souls, by deliberate, systematic, and persevering diffusion of immorality. Footnote 1. Nubius, who in conjunction with the Templars of France and the secret friends of the Revolution in England had caused all troubles endured by the Church and the Holy Father during the celebrated Congress of Rome, and during which the reign of Louis Philippe had so ably planned the revolutions afterwards carried out by Palmerston and Napoleon III, was written to before his death by one of his fellow conspirators in the following strain. We have pushed most things to extremes. We have taken away from the people all the gods of heaven and earth that they had in homage. We have taken away their religious faith, their monarchical faith, their virtue, their probity, their family virtue, and, meantime, what do we hear in the distance but low bellowing? We tremble, for the monster may devour us. We have little by little deprived the people of all honourable sentiment. They will be without piety. The more I think on it, the more I am convinced that we must seek delay of payment. End of footnote 1. The Alta Vendita, then, sat down calmly to consider the best means to accomplish this designs. Satan and his falling angels could devise no more efficacious methods than they found out. They resolved to spread impurity by every method used in the past by demons to tempt men to sin, to make the practice of sin habitual, and to keep the unhappy victim in the state of sin to the end. They had, being living men, means to accomplish this purpose, which devils could not use without the aid of men. Christian civilization, established upon the ruins of the licentiousness of paganism, had kept European society pure. Vice, when it did appear, had to hide its head for shame. Public decency, supported by public opinion, kept it down. So long as morality existed as a recognized virtue, the revolution had no chance of permanent success, and so the men of the Alta Vendita resolved to bring back the world to a state of brutal licentiousness, not only as bad as that of paganism, but to a state at which even the morality of the pagans would shudder. To do this, they proceeded with caution. Their first attempt was to cause vice to lose its conventional horror, and to make it free from civil punishment. The unfortunate class of human beings who make a sad trade in sin were to be taken under the protection of the law, and to be kept free from disease at the expense of the state. Houses were to be licensed, inspected, protected, and given over to their purposes. The dishonor attached to their infamous condition was, as far as the law could effect it, to be taken away. That wholesome sense of danger and fear of disease which averted the criminality disposed from sin was to disappear. The agents of the Alta Vendita had instructions to increase the number and the seductiveness of those unfortunate beings, while the state, when revolutionized, was to close its eyes to their excesses, and to connive at their attempts upon the youth and of the country. They were to be planted close to the great schools and universities, and wherever else they could ruin the rising generation in every country in which the sect should obtain power. Then, literature was systematically rendered as immoral as possible, and diffused with a perseverance and labor worthy of a better cause. Railway stations, newspaper stands, bookshops, and restaurants were even to teem with infamous productions, while the same were scattered broadcast to the people over every land. The teaching of the universities and of all the middle schools of the state was not only to be rendered atheistic and hostile to religion, but was actually framed to demoralize the unfortunate alumni at a season of life always but too prone to vice. Finally, besides the freest license for blasphemy and immorality, and the exhibition and diffusion of immoral pictures, paintings, and statuary, a last attempt was to be made upon the virtue of young females under the guise of educating them up to the standard of human progress. Therefore middle and high-class schools were, regardless of expense, to be provided for female children, who should be, at any cost, taken far away from the protecting care of nuns. They were to be taught in schools directed by lay masters, and always exposed to such influences as would sap, if not destroy, their purity, and, as a sure consequence, their faith. These schools have since been the order of the day with Masonry all over the world. If we cannot suppress woman, let us corrupt her with the Church, said Vinde. And they have faithfully acted upon this advice. The terrible society which planned these infernal means for destroying religion, social order, and the souls of men continued its operations for many years. Its permanent instruction became the gospel of all the secret societies of Europe. Its agents, like Piccolo Tigre, traveled unceasingly in every country. Its orders were received according to the system of Masonry, by the heads and the rank and file of the lodges of so many inevitable decrees. But, unfortunately for the world, it permitted too much political action to the second lines of the great conspiracy. To the latter, ambitious spirits arose, who, while embracing to the full the doctrines of Voltaire and the principles of Weishaupt, began to think that the Alta Vendita halted actual revolution too much. This state of feeling became general when the High Lodge refused admittance to Mancini, who wished to become one of the Invisible 40, the number beyond which the supreme governing body never permitted itself to pass. The jealousy of Nubius, for jealousy is a quality of demons not wanting from the highest intelligence of atheistic organization to the lowest, prevented his being admitted, but he was already too far with the rank and file of the Carbonari to be refused a voice in the supreme management. He raised a cry against the old chiefs as being impotent and needing change. Nubius consequently passed mysteriously away. Monsignor Crétenu Joly, footnote 1, previous opus cited, number 223, end of footnote 1, is clearly of the opinion that it was by poison, and it was a custom with the unfortunate chief to betray for his own protection or for punishment some lodges of Carbonari to the pontifical government. It is more than probable that it was by his provision or information that the same government came into possession of the whole archives of the Alta Vendita, and that the Church and Society have the documents which I have quoted and others still more valuable to guide them in discovering and defeating the attempts of organized atheism. The Alta Vendita subsequently passed to Paris, and since it is believed to Berlin. It was the immediate successor of the inner circle of Weishaupt. It may change in the number of its adepts and in the places of its meetings, but it always subsists. There is over it a recognized chief like Nubius or Weishaupt, but in his lifetime this chief is usually unknown, at least to the world outside illuminated Masonry. He is unknown to the rank and file of the common lodges, but he wields a power which, however, is not, as in the case of Nubius and Mancini, always undisputed. Since that time, if not before, there have been two parties under its directory, each having its own duties, well defined.
Chapter 16. Eckert shows that at present all secret societies are divided into two parties, the party of direction and the party of action, or war party. The duty of the intellectual party is to plot and to contrive. That of the party of action is to combine, recruit, excite to insurrection, and fight. The members of the war party are always members of the intellectual party, but not vice versa. The war party thus know what is being plotted, but the other party, concealed as common Freemasons amongst the simpletons of the lodges, cover both sections from danger. If the war party succeed, the peace party go forward and seize upon the offices of state and the reins of power. Their men go to the hustings, make speeches that suit, are written up in the press, which all the world over is under Masonic influence. They're cried up by the adroit managers of mobs. They become the deputies, the ministers, the Talleyrans, the Fouches, the Gambettis, the Ferries. And of course, they make the war party generals, admirals, and officers of the army, the navy, and the police. If the war party fails, the intellectual party who close their lodges during the combat appear afterwards as partisans, if possible, of the conquering party, or if they cannot be that, they silently conspire. They manage to get some friends into power. They agitate. They, in either case, come to the assistance of the defeated war party. They extenuate the faults, while condemning the heedless rashness of ill-advised, good-natured, though too ardent young men. They cry for mercy. They move the popular compassion. In time, they free the culprits, and thus prepare for new commotions. All Freemasonry has been long thus adapted to enable the intellectual party to assist the war party in distress. It must be remembered that every Carbonaro is in reality a Freemason. He is taught the passes and can manipulate the members of the craft. Now, at the very threshold of the admission of a member to Freemasonry, the master of the lodge, the Venerable, thus solemnly addresses him. "Masons," says he, "are obliged to assist each other by every means when occasion offers. Freemasons ought not mix themselves up in conspiracies, but if you come to know that a Freemason is engaged in any enterprise of the kind, and has fallen a victim to his imprudence, you ought to have compassion upon his misfortune, and the Masonic bond makes it a duty for you to use all your influence and the influence of your friends in order to diminish the rigor of punishment in his favor." From this it will be seen with what astute care Masonry prepares its dupes from the very beginning to subserve the purposes of the universal revolution. Under plea of compassion for a brother in distress, albeit through his supposed imprudence, the Mason's duty is to make use not only of all his own influence, but also of the influence of his friends, to either deliver him altogether from the consequences of what is called his misfortune, or to diminish the rigor of his punishment. Masonry, even in its most innocent form, is a criminal association. It is criminal in its oaths, which are at best rash, and it is criminal in promising obedience to unknown commands coming from hidden superiors. It is always, therefore, sympathizing with crime. It hates punishment of any repressive kind, and does what it can to destroy the death penalty even for murder. In revolution, its common practice is to open gaols and let felons free upon society. When it cannot do this, it raises in their behalf a mock sympathy. Hence, we have Victor Hugo pleading with every government in Europe in favor of revolutionists. We have the French Republic liberating the communists. And there is a motion before the French Parliament to repeal the laws against the party of dynamite, the Internationalists, whose aim is the destruction of every species of religion, law, order, and property, and the establishment of absolute socialism. With ourselves, there is not a revolutionary movement created what we do not find at the same time an intellectual party apparently disconnected with it, often found condemning it, but in reality supporting it indirectly, but zealously. The Odgers and others of the trades union, for instance, will murder and burn, but it is the Bradlaws, the men theorizing in Parliament if they can, or on the platform if they cannot, who sustain that very party of action. They secretly sustain what in public they strongly reprobate, and if necessary disown and denounce. This is a point worthy of deep consideration, and shows more than anything else the ability and astuteness with which the whole organization has been planned. Again, we must remember that while the heads of the party of action are well aware of the course being taken by the intellectual party, it does not follow that the intellectual party know the movements of the party of action, or even the individuals, at least so far as the rank and file are concerned. It therefore can happen in this country that Freemasons or others who are in communication only with the Supreme Council on the continent get instructions to pursue one line of conduct, and that the war party, for deep reasons, get instructions to oppose them. This serves, while preventing the possibility of exposure, to enable the work of the infidel propaganda to be better done. It is the deeply hidden chief and his council that concoct and direct all. They wield a power with which, as is well known, the diplomacy of every nation in the world must count. There are men either of this council or the first line of its service whom it will never permit to be molested. Weishaupt, Nubius, Mazzini, Piccolo-Tigre, De Witt, Meisley, Garibaldi, No. 1, Hartmann, may have been arrested banished, etc. But they never found the prison that could contain them long. It is determined by the Supreme Directory that at any cost the men of their first lines shall not suffer, and from the beginning they have found means to enforce that determination against all the crowned heads of Europe. Now, you must be curious to know who succeeded to the chieftaincy of this formidable conspiracy when Nubius passed away. It is one well known to you, at least by fame. It was no other than the late Lord Palmerston.
Chapter 17. Lord Palmerston. It is with difficulty that one can believe that Lord Palmerston knew the veritable secret of Freemasonry, and that for the greater part of his career he was the real master, the successor of Nubius, the grand patriarch of the Illuminati, and as such, the ruler of all secret societies in the world. As a statesman, the distinguished nobleman had dealings of a very close character with Mazzini, Cavour, Napoleon III, Garibaldi, Kossuth, and other leading revolutionary spirits of Europe in his day. But it was never for a moment suspected that he went so far as to accept the supreme direction of the whole dark and complex machinery of organized atheism, or sacrifice the welfare of the great country he was supposed to serve so ably and so well to the designs of the terrible secret conclave whose acts and tendencies were so well known to him. But the mass of evidence collected by Father Deschamps and others to prove Lord Palmerston's complicity with the worst designs of atheism against Christianity and monarchy is so weighty, clear, and conclusive that it is impossible to refuse it credence. Father Deschamps brings forward in proof the testimony of Henry Misley, one of the foremost revolutionists of the period. When Palmerston reigned over the secret Islam of the sects, and other no less important testimonies, these I would wish, if time permitted, to give at length. But the whole history, unhappily, of Lord Palmerston proves them. In 1809, when but 23 years of age, we find him War Minister in the cabinet of the Duke of Portland. He remained in this office until 1828, during the successive administrations of Mr. Perceval, the Earl of Liverpool, Mr. Canning, Lord Goderic, and the Duke of Wellington. He left his party, the Conservatives, when the last-named Premier insisted upon accepting the resignation of Mr. Hutchinson. In 1830, he accepted the position of Foreign Secretary in the Whig ministry of Earl Grey. Up to this period, he may have been well informed in the policy of England. He saw Napoleon in the fullness of youth, and he saw his fall. He knew and approved of the measures taken after that event by the advisers of George IV for the conservation of legitimate interests in Europe, and for the preservation for the Pope of the Papal States. The balance of power, as formed by the Congress of Vienna, was considered by the wisest and most patriotic English statesmen the best safeguard for British interests and influence on the continent. While it existed, the multitude of small states in Italy and Germany could be always so manipulated by British diplomacy as effectually to prevent that complete isolation which England feels today so keenly, and which may prove so disastrous within a short period to her best interests. If this sound policy has been since changed, it is entirely owing to Palmerston, who appears, after leaving the ranks of the Tories, to have thrown himself absolutely into the hands of that liberalistic Freemasonry, which at that period began to show its power in France and in Europe generally. On his ascension to the Foreign Office in 1830, he found the cabinet freed from the influence of George IV and from conservative traditions, and he at once threw the whole weight of his energy, position, and influence to cause his government to side with the Masonic program for revolutionizing Europe. With his aid, the sectaries were able to disturb Spain, Portugal, Naples, the states of the Church, and the minor states of Italy. The cry for a constitutional government received his support in every state of Europe, great and small. The Pope's temporal authority and every Catholic interest were assailed. England, indeed, remained quiet. Her people were fascinated by that fact. Trade interests being served by the distractions of other states and religious bigotry gratified at seeing the Pope and every Catholic country harassed, they all gave a willing, even a hearty support to the policy of Palmerston. They little knew that it was dictated not by devotion to their interests, but in obedience to a hidden power of which Palmerston had become the dupe and the tool, and which permitted them to glory in their own quiet, only to gain their assistance and, on a future day, to compass with greater certainty their ruin. Freemasonry, as we have already seen, creates many, quote, figurehead, unquote, Grand Masters, from the princes of reigning houses and the foremost statesmen of nations, to whom, however, it only shows a small part of its real secrets. Palmerston was an exception to this rule. He was admitted into the very recesses of the sect. He was made its monarch, and as such ruled with a real sway over its realms of darkness. By this confidence he was flattered, cajoled, and finally entangled beyond all hope of extrication in the meshes of the sectaries. He was a noble, without a hope of issue, or an heir to his title and estates. He therefore preferred signs of the atheistic conspiracy he governed to the interest of the country which employed him, and he sacrificed England to the projects of Masonry. As he advanced in years, he appears to have grown more infatuated with his work. In 1837, in or about the time when Nubius was carried off by poison, Mazzini, who most probably caused that chief to disappear, and who became the leader of the Party of Action, fixed his permanent abode in London. With him came also several counselors of the Grand Patriarch, and from that day forward the liberty of Palmerston to move England in any direction, except in the interest of secret conspiracy, passed away forever. Immediately, plans were elaborated destined to move the program of Weishaupt another step towards its ultimate completion. These were, by the aid of well-planned revolutions, to create one immense empire from the small German states in the center of Europe, under the House of Brandenburg, next to weaken Austrian dominion, then to annihilate the temporal sovereignty of the Pope by the formation of a united kingdom of Italy under the provisional government of the House of Savoy, and lastly to form the discontented Polish, Hungarian, and Slavonian populations an independent kingdom between Austria and Russia. After an interval during which these plans were hatched, Palmerston returned to office in 1846, and then the influence of England was seen at work in the many revolutions which broke out in Europe within 18 months afterwards. If these partly failed, they eventuated, at least, in giving a Masonic ruler to France, in the person of Carbonaro, Louis Napoleon. With him, Palmerston instantly joined the fortunes of England, and with him he plotted for the realization of his Masonic ideas to the very end of his career. Now here comes a most important event, proving beyond question the determination of Palmerston to sacrifice his country to the designs of the sect he ruled. The conservative feeling in England shrank from acknowledging Louis Napoleon or approving of his coup d'etat. The country began to grow afraid of revolutionists, crowned or uncrowned. This feeling was shared by the sovereign, by the cabinet, and by the parliament, so far that Lord Derby was able to move a vote of censure on the government because of the foreign policy of Lord Palmerston. For Palmerston, confiding in the secret strength he wielded, and which was not without its influence in England herself, threw every consideration of loyalty, duty, and honor overboard, and without consulting his queen or his colleagues, he sent, as Foreign Secretary, the recognition of England to Louis Napoleon. He committed England to the Empire, and the other nations of Europe had to follow suit. On this point, Chambers' Encyclopedia Art, quote, Palmerston, unquote, has the following notice, quote, In December 1852, the public was startled at the news that Parliament was no longer a member of the Russell Cabinet. He had expressed his approbation of the coup d'etat of Louis Napoleon, gave England's official acknowledgment of the penetration, without consulting either the Premier or the Queen, and as explanations were refused, Her Majesty exercised her constitutional right of dismissing her minister." Unquote. Palmerston had also audaciously interpolated dispatches signed by the Queen. He acted, in fact, as he pleased. He had the agents of his dark realm in almost every Masonic lodge in England. The press at home and abroad, under Masonic influences, applauded his policy. The sect so acted that his measures were productive of immediate success. His manner, his bonhomie, his very vices fascinated the multitude. He won the confidence of the trading classes, and held the conservatives at bay. Dismissed by the sovereign, he soon returned into power, her master, and from that day to the day of his death ruled England and the world in the interest of the atheistic revolution, of which he thought himself the master spirit. We shall see the truth of this when considering the political action of the sect he led. But first, it will be necessary to glance at what the Church and Christianity generally had to suffer in his day. Chapter 18. War of the Intellectual Party. During what may be called the reign of Palmerston, the war of the intellectual party against Christianity intensified in the dark councils of the Alta Vendita, became accentuated and general throughout Europe. It chiefly lay in the propagandism of immorality, luxury, and naturalism among all classes of society, and then in the spread of atheistic and revolutionary ideas. During the time of Palmerston's influence, not one iota of the advices of the Alta Vendita was permitted to be wasted. Wherever, therefore, it was possible to advance the program mapped out in the permanent instruction, in the letter of Piccolo Tigre, and in the advices of Vindex, that was done with effect. We see, therefore, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, America, and the rest of the world deluged with immoral novels, immodest prints, pictures, and statues, and every legislature invited to legalize a system of prostitution under pretense of expediency, which gave security to sinners and a kind of recognized status to degraded women. We find, wherever Masonry could effect it, these bad influences brought to bear upon the universities, the army, the navy, the training schools, the civil service, and upon the whole population. Quote, "Make corrupt hearts, and you will have no more Catholics," unquote, said Vindex. And faithfully, and with effect, the secret societies of Europe have followed that advice. Hence, in France, under the Empire, Paris, bad enough before, became a very pandemonium of vice, and Italy, just in proportion to the conquests of the Revolution, became systematically corrupted on the very lines laid down by the Alta Vendita. Next, laws, subversive of Christian morality, were caused to be passed in every state, on, of course, the most plausible pretexts. These laws were first that of divorce, then the abolition of impediments to marriage, such as consanguinity, order, and relationship, union with a deceased wife's sister, etc. While the infidels knew that in proportion as nations fell, war of the intellectual party away from the holy restraints of the Church, and as the sanctity of the inviolability of the marriage bond became weakened, the more atheism would enter into the human family. Moreover, the few institutions of a public, Christian nature yet remaining in Christian states were to be removed one after another on some skillfully devised, plausible plea. The Sabbath, which in the Old as well as in the New Dispensation proved so great an advantage to religion and to man, to nations as well as to individuals, was marked out for desecration. The leniency of the Church, which permitted certain necessary works on Sunday, was taken advantage of, and the day adroitly turned into one of common trading in all the great towns of Catholic continental Europe. The infidels, owing to a previous determination arrived at in the lodges, clamored for permission to open museums and places of public amusement on the days sacred to the services of religion, in order to distract the population from hearing Mass and worshiping God. Not that they cared for the unfortunate working man. If the Sabbath ceased tomorrow, he would be the slave on Sunday that they leave him to be during the rest of the week. The one day of rest would be torn from the laboring population, and their lot drawn nearer than before to the absolute slavery which always did exist and would exist again, under every form of idolatry and infidelity. Pending the reduction of men to socialism, the secret conclave directing the whole mass of organized atheism has therefore taken care that in order to withdraw the working man from attending divine worship and hearing the word of God, theaters, cafes, pleasure gardens, drinking saloons, and other still worse means of popular enjoyment should be made to exact the utmost influence on him upon that day. This sad influence is beginning to be felt amongst ourselves. Then, besides the suppression of state recognition to religion, chaplains to the army, the navy, the hospitals, the prisons, etc., were to be withdrawn on the plea of expense or of being unnecessary. Courts of justice and public assemblies were to be deprived of every Christian symbol. This was to be done on the plea of religion being too sacred to be permitted to enter into such places. In courts, in society, at dinners, etc., Christian habits, like that of grace before meals, etc., or any social recognition of God's presence, were to be scouted as not in good taste. The company of ecclesiastics was to be shunned, and 100 other able means were devised to efface the Christian aspect of the nation until they presented an appearance more devoid of religion than that of the very pagans. But of all the attacks made by infidels during the reign of Palmerston, that upon primary, middle class, and superior education was the most marked, the most determined, and decidedly, when successful, the most disastrous. We must remember that from the commencement of the war of atheism on Christianity under Voltaire and the encyclopedists, this means of doing mischief was the one most advocated by the chief leaders. They then accumulate immense sums to diffuse their own bad literature amongst every class. Under the Empire, the most disastrous blow struck by the archmason Talleyrand was the formation of a monopoly of education for infidelity in the foundation of the Paris University. But it was left for the atheistic plotters of this century to perfect the plan of wresting the education of every class and sex of the coming generations of men from out of the hands of the Church and the influence of Christianity. This plan was apparently elaborated as early as 1826 by intellectual Masonry. About that time appeared a dialogue between Quintex and Eugene Sue, in which, after the manner of the letter of Vindex to Nubans, the whole program of the now progressing education war was sketched out. In this, the hopes which Masonry had from Protestantism in countries where the population was mixed were clearly expressed. The jealousy of rival sects was to be excited, and when they could not agree, then the state was to be induced to do away with all kinds of religion, quote, just for peace sake, unquote, and establish schools on a purely secular basis, entirely removed from, quote, clerical control, unquote, and handed over to lay teachers, whom, in time, atheism could find means to, quote, control, unquote, most surely. But in purely Catholic countries, where such an argument as the differences of sex could not be adduced, then the cry was to be against clerical versus lay teaching. Religious teachers were to be banished by the strong hand, as at present in France, and afterwards it could be said that lay teachers were not competent or willing to give religious instruction, and so that, too, in time, could be made to disappear. One may here call to mind the fact that it was Lord Palmerston, directed by Masonry as monarch and English policy as minister, that an insidious attempt was made to introduce secularism into higher education in Ireland by Queen's College, and into primary education by certain acts of the Board of National Education. The fidelity of the Irish episcopacy and the ever-vigilant watchfulness of the Holy See disconcerted both plans, or neutralized them to a great extent. Attempts of a like kind are being made in England. There, by degrees, board schools with almost unlimited assistance from taxes have been first made legal, and then encouraged most adroitly. The church schools have been systematically discouraged, and have now reached the point of danger. This has been effected first by the masonry of Palmerston in high places, and secondly by the masonry of England generally, not in actual league and knowingly with the dark direction I speak of, but unknowingly influenced by its well-devised cries for the spread of light, for the diffusion of education amongst the masses, for the banishment of religious discord, etc. It was, of course, never mentioned that all the advantages cried up could be obtained, together with the still greater advantage of a Christian education, producing a future Christian population. It was seditiously kept out of sight that the people who would be certain to use school boards were those who never went themselves to any church, who would never think of giving religious instruction of any kind to their children. Nothing can show the power of Freemasonry in a stronger light than the stupor it was able to cast over the men who make laws in both houses of the English Parliament, and who were thus hoodwinked into training up men fitted to take position, wealth, and bread itself from themselves and their children, to subject, in another generation, the moneyed classes of England to the lot that befell other blinded, quote, moneyed people, unquote, in France during the last century. In England, the Freemasons had unfortunately the dissenters as allies. Hatred for church schools made the latter make common cause with the atheists against God. But the destruction of the Church of England, they do not hope for the destruction of the vigorous Catholic Church of the country, will never compensate even Socinians for a spirit of instructed irreligion in England, a spirit which, in a generation, will be able and only too willing to attempt atheistic leveling for its own advantage, and clearly not for the benefit of wealthy dissenters, or dissenters having anything at all to lose. The same influences of atheism were potent and for the same reasons in all Australian legislatures. There, the influence of continental Freemasonry is stronger than at home, and conservative influences which neutralize atheistic movements of too democratic a nature in England and Scotland are weaker. Hence, in all Australian parliaments, acts are passed with but a feeble resistance from the church party, abolishing religious education of every kind and making all the education of the country, quote, secular, compulsory, and free, unquote. That is, without religion, enforced upon every class and at the general expense of the state. Hence, after paying the taxation in full, the Catholic and the conscientious Christian of the Church of England have to sustain in all those colonies their own system of education, and this, while paying for the other system, and while bearing the additional burden of the competition of state schools, richly and completely endowed with every possible requisite and luxury out of the general taxes. A final feature in the education war of atheism against the Church especially, and against Christianity of every kind, is the attempted higher education without religion of young girls. The expense which they have induced every legislator to undertake for this purpose is amazing, and how the nations tolerate that expense is equally amazing. It is but carrying out to the letter the advice of Vindex, quote, if we cannot suppress women, let us corrupt her together with the Church, unquote. For this purpose, those infamous hotbeds of foul vice, quote, lodges of adoption, unquote, lodges for women, and, quote, androgynes, unquote, Lodges for libertine Masons and women were established by the Illuminati of France in the last century. For the same purpose, schools for the higher education of young girls are now devised. This we know by the open avowal of leading Masons. They were introduced into France, Belgium, Italy, and Germany for the purpose of withdrawing young girls of the middle and upper classes from the blessed, safe control of nuns and convents, and of leading them to positive atheism by infidel masters and infidel associates. The design of the lodges is succeeding in its mission of terrible mischief, but thank God, not amongst the daughters of respectable Christians of any kind, who value the chastity, the honor, or the future happiness here and hereafter of that sex of their children, who need most care and delicacy in educating. In the extract from the Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita, you have already seen how astutely the atheists compassed the corruption of youth in universities. It is since notorious that in all high schools over which they have been able to obtain influence, the students have been deprived of religion, taught to mock and hate it, allured to vicious courses, and have been placed under professors without religion or morality. How can we be surprised if the universities of the continent have become the hotbeds of vice, revolution, and atheism? Moreover, when Masonry governs, as in France, Italy, and Germany, the only way for youth to obtain a livelihood on entering upon life is by being affiliated to Masonry, and the only way to secure advancement is to be devoted to the principles, the intrigues, and the interests of the sect. The continuous efforts of Masonry, aided by an immoral and atheistic literature, by a corrupt public opinion, by a zealous propagandism of contempt for the Church, for her ministers and her ministrations, and by a sleepless, able directory devoted to the furtherance of every evil end, are enough in all reason to ruin Christianity, if that were not divine. But, in addition to its intellectual efforts, Masonry has had from the beginning another powerful means of destroying the existing social and Christian order of the world in the interest of atheism. 19. A war party under Palmerston. Father Deschamps, on the authority of Eckert and Misley, gives an interesting description of all that Freemasonry, under the direction of Lord Palmerston, attempted and effected after the failure of the revolutionary movements conducted by the Party of Action under Mazzini in 1848. These were fomented to a large extent by British diplomacy and Secret Service money manipulated by Lord Palmerston. Under his guidance and assistance, Mazzini had organized all his revolutionary sects. Young Italy, Young Poland, Young Europe, and the rest sprang as much from that one as from the other. But after years of close union, Mazzini, who was probably hated by Palmerston and dreaded as the murderer of Nubius, began to wane in influence. He and his party felt, of course, the inevitable effects of failure, and the leader subsisted without, however, losing any of his utility for the sect. Napoleon III appears to have supplanted him in the esteem of Palmerston, and would, had he dared, have ceased to follow the Carbonari. Mazzini accordingly hated Napoleon III with a deadly hatred which he lived to be able to gratify signally when Palmerston was no more. As he was the principal means of raising Palmerston to power in the Alta Vendita, so, after Palmerston had passed away, he introduced another great statesman to the high conductors, if not only into the high conduct itself, of the whole conspiracy, and caused a fatal blow to be given to France and to the dynasty of Napoleon. Meanwhile, from 1849 to the end of the life of Palmerston, the designs formed by the High Council of Secret Atheism were carried out with a perfection, a vigor, and a success never previously known in their history. Nothing was precipitated, yet everything marched rapidly to the realization. The plan of Palmerston, or the plan of the deadly council which plotted under him, was to separate the two great conservative empires of Russia and Austria, while, at the same time, dealing a deadly blow at both. It was easy for Palmerston to make England see the utility of weakening Russia, which threatened her Indian possessions. France could be made to join in the fray by her ruler and the powerful Masonic influence at his command. Hence, the Russian campaign of 1852. But it was necessary for this war to keep Prussia and Austria quiet. Prussia was bribed by a promise to get, in time, the Empire of United Germany. Austria was frightened by the resolution of England and France to bring war to the Danube, and so form a projected kingdom in Poland and Hungary. The joint power of England, France, and Turkey could easily then, with the aid of the populations interested, form the new kingdom, and so effectually curb Russia and Austria. But it was of more importance for the designs of the sect upon the temporal power of the Pope, and upon Austria herself, to separate the empires. Palmerston succeeded with Austria, who withdrew from her alliance with Russia. The forces, therefore, of England and France were ordered from the Danube to the barren Crimea as payment for her neutrality. This bribe proved the ruin of Austrian influence. As soon as Russia was separated from her and weakened beyond the power of assisting her, if she would, France, counterbalanced by England, dealt a deadly blow at Austrian rule in Italy, united Italy, and placed the temporal power of the Pope in the last stage of decay. On the other hand, Prussia was permitted to deal a blow soon after at Austria. This finished the prestige of the latter as the leading power in Germany, and confined her to her original territory, with the loss of Venice, her remaining Italian province. After this war, Palmerston passed away, and Mazzini came, once more, into authority in the sect. He remembered his grudge against Napoleon, and at once used his influence with the high direction of Masonry to abandon France and assist Germany, and, on the promise of Bismarck, a promise fulfilled by the May laws, that Germany should persecute the Church as it was persecuted in Italy, Masonry went over to Germany, and Masons urged on Napoleon to that insane expedition which ended in placing Germany as the arbiter of Europe, and France and the dynasty of Napoleon in ruins. In the authorities quoted, there is abundant proof that Masonry, just as it had assisted the French Revolution and the first Napoleon, now assisted the Germans. It placed treason on the side of the war party under Palmerston, French, and sold in fact the unfortunate country and her unscrupulous ruler. Mazzini forced Italy not to assist Napoleon, and was gratified to find before his death that the liar and traitor who, in the hope of getting assistance he did not get from Masonry, had dealt his last blow at the Vicar of Christ, and placed Rome and the remnants of the states of the Church in the hands of the King of Italy, had lost the throne and gained the unenviable character of a coward and a fool. This is necessarily but a brief glance at the program which atheism has both planned and carried out since the rule of Palmerston commenced. Wherever it prevailed, the worst form of persecution of the Church at once began to rage. In Sardinia, as soon as it obtained hold of the king and government, the designs of the French Revolution were at once carried out against religion. The state itself employed the horrible and impure contrivances of the Alta Vendita for the corruption and demoralization of every class of the people. The floodgates of hell were opened. Education was at once made completely secular. Religious teachers were banished. The goods of the religious orders were confiscated. Their convents, their lands, their very churches were sold, and they themselves were forced to starve on a miserable pension, while succession was rigorously prohibited. All recognition of the spiritual power of bishops was put to an end. The priesthood was systematically despised and degraded. The whole ministry of the Church was harassed in 100 vexatious ways. Taxes of a crushing character were levied on the administration of the sacraments, on masses, and on the slender incomes of the parish clergy. Matrimony was made secular, divorce legalized, the privileges of the clerical state abrogated. Worse than all, the lever conscription was rigorously enforced. Candidates for the priesthood, at the most trying season of their career, were compelled to join the army for a number of years, and exposed to all the snares which the Alta Vendita had astutely prepared to destroy their purity, and with it, of course, their vocations. Quote, "Make vicious hearts, and you will have no more Catholics." Unquote. Besides these measures made and provided by public authority, every favor of the state, its power of giving honors, patronage, and place, was constantly denied to Catholics. To get any situation of value in the army, navy, civil service, police, revenue, on the railways, in the telegraph offices, to be a physician to the smallest municipality, to be employed almost anywhere, it was necessary to be a Freemason, or to have powerful Masonic influence. The press, the larger mercantile firms, important manufactories, depending as such institutions mostly do on state patronage and interest, were also in the hands of the sectaries. To Catholics was left the lot of slaves. If permitted to exist at all, it was as the hewers of wood and the drawers of water. The lands which those amongst them held who did not forsake religion were taxed to an unbearable extent. The condition of the faithful Catholic peasants became wretched from the load of fiscal burdens placed upon them. The triumph of atheism could not be more complete, so far as having all that the world could give on its side, and leaving to the Church scarcely more than covered her divine founder upon the cross. Bismarck, though assisted in his wars against France by the brave Catholic soldiers of the Rhine, and of the fatherland generally, no sooner had his rival crushed and his victory secured than he hastened to pay to Freemasonry his promised persecution of the Church. The Freemasons in the German Parliament and the ministers of the sect aided him to prepare measures against the Catholic religion as drastic as those in operation in Italy, even worse in many respects. The religious orders of men and women were rigorously suppressed or banished as a first installment. Then fell Catholic education to make way for an infidel propagandism. Next came harassing decrees against the clergy, by which bishops were banished or imprisoned, and parishes were deprived in hundreds of their priests. All the bad immoral influences, invented and propagated by the sectaries, were permitted to run riot in the land. A schism was attempted in the Church. Ecclesiastical education was corrupted in the very bud, and all but the existence of Catholics was proscribed. Wherever we find the dark sect triumphant, we find the same results. In the republics of South America, where Freemasonry holds the highest place, the condition of the Church is that of normal persecution and vexation of every kind. It has been so for many years in Spain and Portugal, in Switzerland, and to whatever extent Freemasons can accomplish it, in Belgium and in Austria. The Dark Directory succeeded Weishaupt. The Alta Vendita and Palmerston sits in Paris and in Berlin, almost openly, and prepares at leisure its measures, which are nothing short of, first, the speedy weakening of the Church, and then a bloody attempt at her extermination. If it goes on slower than it did during the French Revolution, it is in order to go on surer. Past experience, too, and the determination of the sect already arrived at, show but too clearly that a single, final consummation is kept steadily in view. The impure assassins who conduct the conspiracy have had no scruple to imbue their hands in the blood of Christians in the past, and they never will have a scruple to do so, whenever there is a hope of success. In fact, from what I have seen and studied on the continent, an attempt at this ultimate means of getting rid, at least, of the clergy and principal lay leaders amongst Catholics might take place in France, and even in Italy at any moment. In France, some new measures of persecution is introduced every day. The Concordat is broken openly. The honor of the country is despised. Subventions belonging by contract to the clergy are withdrawn. The insolence of the atheistical government, relying on the strength of the army and on the unaccountable apathy or cowardice of the French Catholic laity, progresses so fast that no act of the Revolution of 1789 or of the Commune can be thought improbable within the present decade, and Italy would be sure to follow any example set by France in this or in any other method of exterminating the Church. There are sure signs in all the countries where the atheistic revolution has made decided progress that this final catastrophe is already planned and that its instruments are in course of preparation. These instruments are something the same as were devised by the illuminated lodges, when the power of the French Revolution began to pass from the National Assembly to the clubs. The clubs were the open and ultimate expression of the destructive anti-Christianity of atheism, and when the lodges reached so far, there was no further need for secrecy. That which in the jargon of the sects is called, quote, the object of the labor of ages, unquote, was attained. Man was without God or faith, king or law. He had reached the level aimed at by the Commune, which is itself the ultimate end of all Masonry and all that secret atheistic plotting which, since the rise of atheism, has filled the world. In our day, if Masonry does not find Jacobite or other clubs, it originates and cherishes movements fully as satanic and as dangerous. Communism, just like Carbonarianism, is but a form of the illuminated Masonry of Weishaupt. Quote, our end, said the Alta Vendita, is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution, unquote. Names and methods are varied, but that end is ever the same. The clubs at the period of the French Revolution were, after all, local. Masonry now endeavors to generalize their principles and their powers of destructive activity on a vastly more extended scale. We therefore no longer hear of Jacobins or Girondins, but we hear of movements destined to be for all countries what the Jacobins and the Girondins were for Paris and for France. As surely, and for the same purpose, as the clubs proceeded from the lodges in 1789, so, in the later half of the 19th century, the lodges sent out upon the whole civilized world, for the very same intent, the terrible socialist organizations, all founded upon the lines of communism, and called according to the exigencies of time, place, and condition.